Just to kind of beat the goal.
Hi everybody, I'm here once again. I'm here to do some training on some friction fire for those that I'm training with and those who I'm teaching. So we're going to go along. I'm going to do a voiceover with most of this because I'm in a public area, and I'm about to train with a few other youth here as well. I'm just going to be doing friction fire with a bow drill. So we're currently at Pine Lodge Hotel, and we're going to start off by doing this friction fire today. So let's get to it.
Okay, let's start looking at some of the tools we'll be using today, starting with a Laplander saw. A very important tool in friction fire. It also has a safety button that releases the blade for health and safety reasons. This tool will be used in a demonstration today. The next tool that we're going to be looking at is an ultimate survival knife from Gerber. A very sturdy blade. It can be used for a petanque blade as well, even a spear. The sheath also helps the knife to not come out as well. At the bottom is a flint with a bit of rope to it that you can use for friction fire. Taking the straps off, on the inside of it is a diamond sharpening steel to sharpen your knife. Just on the side with a bit of sellotape, there is a needle that I use for either compasses or repairing some of my gear. Looking at the back of the sheath as I'm demonstrating here, it has a little picture that helps with survival techniques, with signaling. There is a little booklet that is left in the back there. That's why I find Gerber's tools and equipment really good. They come with some good information. On this piece of paper, it shows a little bit of parts about survival and friction fire. Also, a fire saw. Other demonstrations. So, under rescue situations, this is an important little paper. I would recommend not throwing it away, and it's really important to just keep with your tools. Knowledge is strength, knowledge is power. So, the next tool that we have is a Gerber Parang. This has been taken off the market at some points, but it is one of my most important tools. In a survival situation, I would definitely, this would be one of the main tools I would grab. May need a little bit of cleaning up as well. I do use it quite often. The next part I will be bringing out is the friction fire kit, a heath board, and a spindle stick. These two wood are from the same wood, and that is pine. This little bone carving here is my bearing block that I hold on the top of the spindle. It's made out of bone. It talks of a story of our ancestors, us via our mountains and our rivers. This is my bow that I use on the spindle to create the spindle to spin. It needs to be sturdy, as I've just demonstrated, and the piece of string that I hold on it is a 550 paracord. This next step is from step 1 to step 4 in friction fire. These are the steps in which you will need to do while creating fire with friction. Now, fire nest. One of the most important things that we have in making a fire nest is old man's bed. It's tree moss. As I'm demonstrating, this is one of the most important parts. This is that you would use on your fire nest. This is tree fern fir. And now, as the picture demonstrates, where to find it. Pine needles. Toi Toi. Kikuyu grass. You only pick the brown ones. Okay, so let's make the fire nest. First, as a base, you will use your kikuyu grass. One of these points as you use, look, I use quite a bit for the reasons is to protect your hands from when the fire starts. You would usually put down your next part of your fire nest, and as I'll demonstrate, you put down pine needles, your toi toi, and I do like to use this stuff here, and then your stick in your old man's beard. I put quite a lot of this, for this is the main part that will create when you blow your embers in the fire nest. This part will catch a light. This is the best stuff to use. And then I just add a bit of tree fern into the fire nest, and that completes my fire nest. I am actually squeezing it together to prepare the nest to catch the embers to start the fire. Well done. This is what it looks like. Now, I found a little bit of bark. This is actually, we just found around. It's just to keep it on the ground, to keep the moisture away from the dust when I collect it. So it's nothing much important. You can use any sorts of thing. You can use a bit of cardboard. You can use a bark off a tree. I think this comes from a palm tree just on one of the limbs at the bottom that connects to the tree. So I just found it and grabbed it. We're going to be using that today. Okay, you see as the oval shape that is on this bit of bark, we are going to need that shape so to catch our dust from the heath board and the bow drill set so that we can create the fire. Now, I'm going to demonstrate how to place the hole first on the heath board. Make sure it's about a centimetre away from the side. Place it down and then mark the spot. I take a bit of time in this preparation so that I know it's done properly. If it isn't done properly, the spindle will constantly spin, burn in, and then burn out the side and drop off. It'll waste all your energy and time. You will really need to make sure that this bedding part on the heath board with the spindle is done correctly. So I will take a little bit of time to do this part here. If you don't, the spindle could spin around on the top and it'll just rub it if it's not, the hole is not deep enough, and it'll waste a bit of energy. If it is done too close to the side, it'll come off. So you need to make sure this part is done correctly. The first step in friction fire. So, as you see, there are other holes that I've made in this board. The two boards are made out of pine. I've used it a few times, so I know that the two wood that you'll use on the heath board and the spindle needs to be from the same wood. Just be careful with your knives, especially when you're doing this part. We don't want it slipping off and hurting you. So now let's show you the step. That is step 1 in the heath board. These are going to be the tools that I'll be using while creating the friction fire. Let's get to it. Place your foot on top of the heath board. Grab your spindle and your bow. The cord needs to be a 550 paracord. It's pretty strong, sturdy, and it's really good to use. We are now going to connect the spindle to the bow. Make sure you place the spindle on the outside of the bow to get the most out of the spin when using the bow and spindle. My bearing block, which is made out of bone, I've made a little point at the back in which I can put the top of the spindle so that I can get less friction up the top. I've connected my bone bearing block to a piece of string in which holds my hand together, and the bearing block actually protects my hand from the spindle. If it comes off, it doesn't stab me. Safety first. Now, make sure you try and use the full length of your bow to get the most spin out of your spindle and your bow to create that friction fire. What we're doing here on stage 1, actually stage 2, is bearing the spindle into the heath board and creating some dust, but also making the hole more firmative that it will not slip out the side. Let's just check here. Keep the dust, do not throw it away. This is step 2, as I'm demonstrating here. Step 2. Now we're grabbing a Laplander saw. We're going to be cutting a little gap into the heath board as I'm demonstrating in step 3. It needs to be at least cut a line into just before the center of the hole, and then you'll cut the other cut that you'll place into is to make the gap. Now the gap needs to be at least a centimeter wide, coming down into a V shape to the center of the hole. Here goes the second cut. Try not to go too far. Don't, just like I said, just before the center of the hole. Don't go too far into it. It creates a little gap and at the bottom, and it takes a little bit harder to make the ember because the dust keeps on going down there and pressed out the bottom or out the side. It just creates problems later on. I just grabbed the Ultimate Survival Knife. I need to use it to smoothen the inside of this gap. The reasons why is that if there's little parts sticking out, and what happens is that when you collect the dust and you go and the ember is ready and starting to burn a little bit, when you go to move it out with your knife, it can catch on those areas, and what it does then is wreck your dust and can also put out your ember. So make sure that part is nice and smooth. Be very careful with the knife, especially as you see me doing here. I've been doing it for a while. You don't want the knife slipping out and cutting your hand. This is the gap in which I'm using. Look, I could just use my finger inside the gap. So make it about a centimeter wide. Now let's place the heath board onto the bark with the oval part, the best of the that bark, oval part slightly pointing up. For the reasons is it'll push the dust back into the hole and creates the, when the friction starts, it'll create the ember. Now we're connecting the heath board to my hand, which is made out of bone. Before I do that, I'll use the parang, the Gerber parang, to sharpen the end of the spindle so that we can create a smaller end at the top, less friction on the bearing block, and at the bottom should be wider and create more friction to create the dust and the ember. So we need to keep the top of the spindle as sharp as possible. If you want to, you can place a little leaf on your bearing block inside that little gap that you put the top of the spindle into, so to lessen the friction up top. Now, when placing the spindle on the bow, make sure the spindle's on the outside, as I'm demonstrating here, so that you can get more spins on your spindle when demonstrating the spinning on the friction part of this demonstration. Now, place the bearing block on top of the spindle and move the bow back and forwards as possible. Soon you will create some friction, and then you should start seeing smoke, as you're starting to see now. This is creating the dust part before you start creating the ember. I just want to create dust inside that little gap that I cut, so that we can start an ember. You see the dust that's accumulated? Now what I'm going to do is to keep that dust in the center. As you see, I'm going to push all that dust into the main part of the hole. And I'll just put a little bit of roughing up the edge to create more friction at the ends with my knife. And then here we go. We need to also keep that top of that spindle sharp. I'm using a pull and push with my body action to less energy, because I want to keep all my energy for the actual doing the friction fire part. So I'm using my body and my pulling action of my hand, keeping the knife away from my body, for safety reasons. This is one part you need to keep an eye on. Now the next step that I'm going to be doing with the friction fire is creating the ember. Start off easy and smooth as you move the bow back and forwards, and then when you start seeing the smoke, just keep it going until the ember starts. Let's start. See, as I place my foot really right over the bearing, the heath board, and my hand is connected and locked into my knee, on the opposite side of my knee. So to try and keep the spindle directly down above the heath board, to put all my weight down on that spindle. Let's start bearing. Now I'm going to be doing this and you'll be seeing a fair bit of smoke, and then I'm going to make sure that I keep it going for a little bit of time, so to create the ember in that gap. It does make a little bit of sound now and again of the two boards rubbing together, but you notice even though I see the smoke, I do not stop, and then you'll see the change in the smoke start getting a little bit thicker and a little bit denser, and then
all you do is let it sit and just waver it with your hand. Grab the back of the knife, place it in the center, move it out slowly. Yep. Transfer this into it. Yep. Right, you gonna do that also? Huh? Gonna do that also, do you? Give it a shake around.
Excellent. There we go. We got fire.
There's fire.
Turn the focus.
And that's what.
thank you for watching Friction Fire with Mr. Joyce. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments. But apart from that, hope you learned something. Don't forget to practice it and you'll become an expert. Awesome. Thank you.